Okay, so this module talks about the First Amendment and introduces the First Amendment. And as I mentioned in other places, everything else that we talk about in this class for the entire semester is going to flow from the First Amendment. So it's going to be really important that you kind of have a baseline understanding of, first of all, what the First Amendment is, generally speaking, what it protects, and generally speaking, how judges interpret the First Amendment. One of the things you'll notice when you read Chapter 2, which you've hopefully done, and then when you watch my presentation, is you'll notice that I take a different approach in some places than the book does, as far as like how we categorize things. I think we both get to the same place. You know, one of the examples is I sort of talk about the theories of interpreting the First Amendment, and the book more or less talks about the philosophies that underlie the First Amendment. And I think they're in a lot of ways, you know, again, getting at the same kind of idea, but just approaching it a little differently. And the beginning of this chapter just gives a really nice, you know, in the first paragraph, a really nice kind of overview of the kinds of things that are First Amendment issues. This idea of, in 2015, there was a guy who was convicted for threatening his ex-girlfriend because she broke up with him. He got on Facebook and basically started posting this stuff about how he was going to kill her, and it was like very sort of like kind of flowery and pretty direct language. He was arguing that basically this was art, and that just like a a rapper like Eminem or somebody says, you know, he's going to go kill all these people or whatever, he isn't really actually going to do it. Okay, so the phone just rang, so I had an edit there. But what I was saying was this guy was arguing that he essentially was, you know, not really going to carry out any of those threats. He was more or less just blowing off steam. And the Supreme Court eventually agreed with him and, you know, overturned his conviction. Also, the book mentions this, there was a middle school case where, you know, people have the I Heart Boobies wristbands now to support cancer awareness. And basically there have been middle schools and elementary schools that have attempted to ban those. You know, that again brings up First Amendment issues. License plates even bring up First Amendment issues. The example the book gives is about banning the Confederate flag on certain license plates, but you can also sort of get into this issue with vanity plates too, where there have been cases where, you know, people who have wanted to have certain vanity plates or bumper stickers or those sort of things, you know, have gotten into trouble and then have been able to use the First Amendment successfully to protect themselves. So one thing that really is important to kind of talk about that the book does near the end of the chapter, but I want to do here, is to kind of talk about this concept of overbroad, vague, and a chilling effect. So you have to sort of understand, and it is discussed in the presentation, but the First Amendment is viewed as being one of the most important rights that we have as people in a democracy. And so generally speaking, courts are going to approach any kind of restrictions on the First Amendment very skeptically. Now that doesn't mean you can't restrict it, as we've already seen, but it means that essentially if you're going to restrict it, you have to be very careful. And the one thing you can't do, for example, is being overbroad. When you're overbroad, you are essentially banning a lot more speech than is actually necessary to accomplish your goals. So the book gives an example of an airport in Los Angeles, and they were essentially just trying to get rid of the I forget what they called the people who used to kind of like sort of confront you in an airport and kind of try to give you a flower and then would sort of talk to you about political stuff. And people were just complaining that, hey, you know, I can't go through the airport because these people are kind of constantly bothering me. And so there was a legitimate, you know, goal there because, you know, if people are constantly being bothered, they might not make it to their plane on time. it's just annoying and you're basically just interfering with the functioning of the airport. But the problem is they basically passed a law that banned all political speech in the airport. And when that was eventually challenged in court, the court said, no, you can't do that, that's overbroad. Really, the only thing that you wanted to do and that you say you want to do is basically restrict the people who are kind of going up and bothering people. Whereas you, by restricting all political speech, you've now made it so I can't even wear a political button if I want to at the airport. So that's an example of something being overbroad. Vague is kind of the same type of concept, or it's not really the same type of concept, but it's, essentially when something is vague, you really don't know the meaning of it. And so the example that the book gives is there was this flag statute of law that basically said you can't treat the American flag contemptuously. And the court was essentially saying, what does it mean to contemptuously treat the flag? Who can actually answer that? And the answer is nobody can answer that. And so it's vague. And so both of these things are basically going to be reasons to strike down restrictions of the First Amendment. Also, the courts have recognized that if you're a city, you can't sort of allow city officials to restrict speech in ways that are illegal. So for example, if you are in a small town and the city manager, or there's one clerk who works in the courthouse and he's the person who has full power to give out parade permits, he might choose to say, oh, you want to have a pro-gun parade? Yeah, sure, here's your permit. Oh, you want to have a pro-gay pride parade? Nah, I don't like that. You can't have that. And essentially what the Supreme Court has said is that you really can't put power like that in the hands of people who really don't understand the First Amendment and don't know what they're supposed to be doing. And so again, this idea of overbroadness and vagueness comes into play. Also, all of this leads to what we call a chilling effect. And a chilling effect simply means that because you don't know for sure what's going to happen to you if you speak, you don't speak. And so that's essentially what a chilling effect is. It's basically freezing speech, making people feel too scared or too uncertain to be able to speak because they're not sure what's going to happen to them. So again, hopefully that kind of makes some sense, and now you can basically look at the PowerPoint, which is actually done with a previous version of software we used to have at BG and we don't have anymore, so you'll notice it's set up a little bit different. There's also a couple of videos after, or one video after, about cussing and essentially how laws against swear words are often treated by courts. So enjoy this module, and yeah, enjoy this module.